Welcome. I'm Glen Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. This TV series explores a variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolent social change. This month, we'll explore a smart way to make our elections more effective and our democracy more robust. It will stimulate participation by more political parties and better discussion of the issues. And this voting method will increase voter participation and will even save time and money. The program here that you'll watch is about instant runoff voting, and sometimes you hear it referred to as preference voting or ranked choice voting. It's a fresh way that really deserves the exploration of the public, and hope we can advance that discussion tonight. We have three guests who can share their information and some fresh perspectives. I'm happy to welcome Janet Jordon, Taryn Gearhart, and Rich Anderson-Connolly. Janet is active in the Green Party and actively promotes instant runoff voting. Taryn and Rich have both worked on a statewide initiative to create instant runoff voting in Washington recently. And in addition, Taryn is vice president of a statewide organization promoting it, and Rich has organized for instant runoff voting in Tacoma and Pierce County. So welcome to all of you. Good to have you here. Probably the starting point for the viewers is people's sense of frustration about how some of our voting and electoral processes are going. Currently we have a plurality method where a person can be elected even without a majority vote, and people are frustrated with limited choices and spoilers and wasted votes and things. So what problems are you concerned about?
You want to start off?
Yeah, I think the plurality system comes about because we have a winner-take-all voting system. Most of our elections in this country are based upon single-member districts, and it's the person with the most votes, although need not be a majority of the votes, will win. This is called the plurality system, unlike actually most democracies on the planet. And when you have a system like this, you tend to get two parties, and you get a fairly narrow debate, and outside voices are essentially shut out because those votes are wasted or spoilers. So you get a narrow range of debate, and it's issues that really only appeal to some swing voters. A lot of us are cut out.
Mm-hmm. And the plurality system as well means that most of the time you're not going to see, in the primary, you're not going to see people getting a 50% of the vote. You're going to see 30% or 40%, and then you'll winnow down the field and go to a general election. And a lot of times you still won't see a majority at the general election. Mm-hmm.
So. The lack of participation by the third parties and independents has meant that a lot of the fresh ideas that used to enter our policy from these people are being shut out now. Do you have that?
Yeah, I have a list for you.
These are some of the major ideas that started out with third parties. Laws to curb child labor, women's right to vote, unemployment compensation, Federal Reserve System, Social Security. I could go on and on. The way they normally enter the system is for a third party to suggest them, and when the third party begins to become a little stronger so that it's somewhat of a threat, the major parties will just adopt these issues. And then even though the third party doesn't win, its ideas come into the public policy. Mm-hmm. And that's just not happening anymore because third parties and independents are just being shut out.
So there's another angst that's gripped the people of Washington State, and that has to do with the primary, where people are just all bent out of shape and the system is very much in flux. How we've had what used to be called the blanket primary, and can you tell how that worked, Janet, and what's happened with that?
Well, there really were historically, there have been two reasons for primaries. One is just to take a wide field of candidates and winnow it down so that there are two and finally just one who has an actual majority. And the other reason is to allow the major parties to nominate their candidates. And systems might do one but not the other. Now, the blanket primary was fine for taking a wide field, but it actually allowed someone from one party to sneakily reach over into another party and vote for their weakest candidate so they'd have less of a chance of winning in the general election. And since it just wasn't very good at that part of it, it was ruled unconstitutional. Whereas, would you like to talk about the Louisiana?
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. So the courts threw out the blanket primary, which was actually popular with the voters because it gave maximum choice, essentially, to the voters, but it violated the parties' rights of association in order to choose their own standard bearers. And the solution, well, there were two solutions being considered. The one that we have is the one the legislature gave us, the Montana system, which is essentially a partisan primary. So you have to go and you have to select a ballot from a particular party, a major party or an independent or a nonpartisan, I guess, ballot. That's what we have. There was an initiative that...
But people didn't like
and
that
people
either,
didn't like that.
because people didn't want to limit themselves to only one party.
And then the initiative came that was sponsored by the Grange, which was essentially a top two based upon a Louisiana system, which...
top two regardless of party.
Top two regardless of party would move on. That was also thrown out. So although it won with a very high percentage by the people. So we're now actually back to the Montana, which seems to be legal, although fairly unpopular, while the top two Louisiana is in the courts. But we would like to suggest that the IRV is the third option that has really been considered.
Instant
runoff voting. Yeah, sorry. Instant runoff voting actually has advantages of all those systems plus more. And this, if we're looking for a way forward that would maximize choice and save money, this, I think, would be the way forward that we should consider.
We have a couple diagrams that will illustrate this. One is two pie charts, essentially. Janet, can you tell us what these pie charts illustrate?
Yes, the pie chart on the left shows what happens in an election without instant runoff voting, where there's three candidates. There's two major parties, a red one and a green one, and that sneaky third party has come in there and has taken away some of the votes from the two major parties, as they see it. You can see that the red party still has more than the green party, even though neither one of them has 51%. And you can imagine that the Green Party is saying to the minor party, look, your platform is so close to ours, why don't you just vote for us, and then we can win as a block. We have the same underlying program, and the Independent Party is saying, no way, we are not that close to you.
So in that election, somebody's going to, if that's a three-way election, somebody's going to win without actually having a majority of the vote.
Yeah.
That's why it's called plurality.
Plurality, just as long as it's more than the next party,
Yes.
it's enough to win, even though you might be below a majority.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at it, actually the majority is voting for not that red party.
Yeah.
So
And one thing that we should all know right now at this point is that the current primary, as Rich mentioned earlier, is not nailed down yet. It's still pending in the courts. If you go to the Secretary of State's office and you go to the elections page and you look up 872, you will see a whole page of litigation based of surrounding the primary that's been going on for the last 5 years. And this basically came about when the two major parties decided they were going to follow suit what California did and try to move us towards a closed primary in our state. And this is problematic for trying to have a marketplace of ideas, if you will, in a political system. If you try to make it institutionalize and consolidate all the power into just two name brands or political platforms that have an ideology or alignments, as you're talking about, then you're really what's the best word for it? You're getting rid of the diversity of the body politic. There's so many ideas, what you just mentioned earlier, that have come from these other minority parties that have moved us along in our society. You know, even if the party didn't come to power, that they at least got a platform or a chance to put their ideas out there. And if this continues and we have closed primaries, you know, you're basically just killing the body politic.
Is there anything you want to say about the diagram that we've got, the pie charts, before we go on to the next slide?
Well, the second chart there to the right is actually a chart of what happens to that same election if IRV is applied. Each one of the voters gets to put down who their first choice is and who their second choice is. Now we're saying in this instance that the minor party really did feel somewhat more aligned to the Green Party. So you notice that a lot of their votes were for their second choice votes were for the Green Party. So when their party was eliminated as a candidate, which it was, since it was a third party, it came in third, a lot of their votes defaulted to the Green Party and actually brought that third Green Party over the line of 51%.
Yeah.
Some of them actually went to the Red Party, as you can see, and I have to point out that some of them actually refused to put down a second choice because they said, I'm either having my candidate or no candidate. But IRV in this case did give over a 51% victory to a party, and it wasn't the one that was originally ahead.
Yeah. And we should mention that the colors you use are just arbitrary. They're not trying to identify
it's
the
not
stereotype
the
of red state, blue state, or the party that's called Green Party.
Right.
These are just different colors just to be visible on the screen here.
I think it would be very useful at this point in time, before we get too far ahead of ourselves here, to actually, you know, give an explanation of instant runoff voting, because I don't want to have people alienated out there about the process of how.
We've got some slides that we'll show here. We can probably move on to the next one while the conversation is talking it through.
I could try just to describe in general the voting algorithm that's, the counting algorithm that's used to count instant runoff votes.
Okay.
From the point of view of the voter, there'd be one change. When you go into the ballot box, you're going to see more than one column. You're going to see a column for your first choice, your second choice, your third choice, and maybe even more. Okay. It won't just be picking one candidate anymore. So for a voter, you're going to have to know who's my favorite and who's my second favorite and so forth, which in many cases isn't too hard, especially for people who are feeling somewhat disenfranchised or alienated. They may feel closer to one party of the major parties, but still like a minor candidate more.
Or vice versa. They might have a preference for a major party, but have a smaller party as their second choice.
Absolutely.
So it could go either way.
Yeah, and people will generally, I think, know their top three choices
they could
pretty
them.
easily.
Yeah.
Then after we vote this way, the other difference compared to plurality is how the ballots are now counted. And the way it works is it's called instant runoff because there is this old thing called the traditional runoff in which you could have an entirely separate election. With instant runoff voting, you don't need to do that. You can actually have separate counting rounds instead of making people come back to the voting place 2 months later, and usually a turnoff falls off. But what you do is you count the first round, you look at everybody's first choice. If any candidate gets a majority of first choices, we have a winner. So it would be just like a plurality.
Okay.
And you're looking at first
we'll
choice.
have a page that'll, the diagram, we have a second, we have another diagram that'll show that in just a moment.
So your first diagram, would show the how the ballot would look.
Okay.
In which case you would have the list of candidates, and then you'd have several columns now, first, second, third.
Right.
And so someone on the left may vote Nader and then Gore, and someone on the right may vote Buchanan and then Bush.
And the next diagram we'll have examples of some of the bubbles on the voting
which is what we're
sheet
looking
actually filled in to illustrate. And so,
Okay.
This is a ranking process.
That's
So,
Picking your
yeah.
first choice, your second
Yeah.
choice, your third choice.
and that's why it sometimes is called
ranked choice voting
Ranked
or
choice
preferential voting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
you
the
get-
instant runoff voting is I think more helpful to those people who understand the concept of the traditional runoff vote.
Yeah. In those
For those who are not
jurisdictions-
familiar with that, they may just want to call it preferential
Yeah.
voting or ranked choice voting.
Because there are some jurisdictions where, like in the November general election, if nobody gets a majority, they have to come back and vote in December.
Yes.
And that's problematic for people's
That's right.
schedules and the weather and everything.
That's right, yeah.
And those
and
runoffs
instant
are
runoff
a
voting
nuisance.
absolutely solves that problem.
Yeah, because the runoff is done
Yeah.
at the same time just by counting the ballots again.
Yeah, yeah. And so after the first round of counting, if nobody gets a majority, you don't have a winner with instant runoff voting if nobody gets to a majority. So it's a majority rule system in contrast to what we have now.
Which majority means?
Majority means at least 50%. So 50% of votes plus one.
Yeah.
So if someone comes in below that threshold, you're not done. Then you go into the second round of counting. You don't call everybody
Yeah.
back, but you have a second round, and what you do is you eliminate the candidate who's in last place, essentially with first choice votes.
And then redistribute.
And then you would redistribute those votes. You would now go to their next preference. You would look at their second choices and add those in, and that may push one of the candidates over the top. So to make a real world example, if you were to say Nader came in third and Nader gets knocked out, his votes might push then Gore over the top. On the other side, you can make the same example with Ross Perot. Had Ross Perot been knocked out, it may have given Bush Sr. The election. But you're essentially redistributing those. Another way to think about this is that in every counting round, you count the person's highest preference for a candidate who's still in the race. So if my first choice is still in the race, that's what will get counted.
Yeah.
If my first choice, however, happens to be a more minor candidate and gets eliminated, then my next highest choice, my second or my third, if I vote for a number of minor candidates.
And we'll show the next diagram that we will show in a moment is a chart showing percentages of a four-way presidential race where nobody had a majority.
That's
They're
right.
all below, and so we'll see and these numbers will look kind of familiar because
That's right, yes.
it's got the names of candidates that we all recognize.
These are based upon the 2000 election for president in Florida.
In Florida, yes.
Yes.
So that table of numbers will be there, and we'll see that. In just
And
a
so in
moment.
that example, what would have happened is the Buchanan would have been knocked out first because
Right.
he came in last,
Yeah.
and that percentage of his would have been distributed to the remaining candidates, probably largely Bush, although
Yeah.
it would not have pushed Bush over the
Yes.
top. Nader then would have been knocked out in the next round.
No, it's the table. We're trying to get these sequenced here.
Mm-hmm.
The table of numbers is what we want to look at.
The percentages.
That one.
Yes, that's correct.
That one only. That's the last one we'll see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Buchanan would have been knocked out in the first round, and some of those votes would have been given to Bush, although no candidate would have had a majority. And so then Nader would have been knocked out, and that would have actually probably propelled Gore over 50% plus
yeah,
one.
which would have turned the Florida vote and would have turned the national
That's
vote.
right. Yeah.
I feel compelled to interject here because I just know there's people out there in TV land, their eyes are glazing over like, oh my God, don't change the channel yet. Basically, there's a website where you can go and actually see this for the visual folks.
Yeah.
I would encourage folks to go to www.irvwad.org
Yeah.
and click on the flash demonstration. It's called Chris Gates, whatever.
Yeah.
It's actually a flash animation.
Yeah,
It's pictures. It's
Well, I
easy
watched
to,
it a couple times. It's
Yeah.
very easy to follow,
Yeah, so
and we'll have the
if we're
website
confusing
listing.
you, please do that
Yeah.
because we really want you to be with us on
We will list the
understanding this.
website later on during the program,
Yes.
and then again at the very end.
Okay.
Because that demonstration is very easy. What we're showing here are just a few samples
Yes,
to
the
illustrate the
snapshots
points.
of the breakdown
Right.
of the process.
But it's really a very similar process. Somebody has said it's as easy as 1, 2, 3.
Yes,
you know,
that's right, yeah.
you just rank your choices, and what's cool then is that if your first choice doesn't get it, you're still in the running.
Right.
And it does a better job of measuring what people really want.
Well, you don't have to vote out of fear anymore.
Yeah.
You don't have to vote to not let the person that you really will despise, against. You're voting to keep them from getting there. You can actually vote your hope.
Right.
And that's really important to revitalize our democracy.
And it gets rid of all those problems that people are annoyed with, like the lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
and wasting your vote.
Marginalizing the voice of the third or the minority parties.
Right,
All the ideas that would be coming to the table.
You know, I can hear somebody saying, well, if that third party person isn't expecting to win anyway, why do all this? But having that first vote where everyone sees how many people actually want that minor person as their first choice, that's very important. That just is incontrovertible proof that there are people that want that kind of a platform.
That's right, and that raises the issues that you mentioned earlier in the show, you know, things like child labor laws and Social Security and things that start out with minor party votes, minor party platforms, and so it's a way of lifting those up. And also, I think one of the things I like about this is that it gives people the opportunity to come out and vote rather than stay home because they say, well, the person I really want doesn't have a chance to win, so why bother? This way, you can come out and, like you said, vote for your hopes, vote for what you really want, and it'll increase voter turnout and you'll have a more robust democracy.
Well, here's a couple other things to keep in mind here as we go along. This is just one piece of the full electoral reform package that we're not going to go into the other things necessarily today, but this is one major piece that would all by itself make a huge change. For one thing, by eliminating the primary and just having a general instant runoff voting election, you save $13 million in this state alone, every election cycle. That's $13 million. I bet the Seattle school systems could figure out something to do with that $13 million, maybe.
Yeah, or the local
and
school districts here.
Another thing about eliminating the primaries is typically right now we have a problem in that the voter pamphlet does not carry minor parties. So, unless there's two or more people, and typically because you're a minor party, it's hard to get, 4 or 5 people in a minor party to run. What are you going to? So, if we get rid of the primary, then we'll have one voter pamphlet, which everyone will get the same amount of advertisement by the public dime, because that basically is our taxpayer money that puts out that voter pamphlet. So you will see all of the candidates in there. And we won't, the minor party candidates won't be left in the dust about, most people don't even know who these folks are until they get to the general election. That's the first time they've ever even seen this idea.
Right.
So
there's some other benefits too. One is that the public is really irritated with negative campaigning and mudslinging. I wonder, could somebody just say how instant runoff voting would address that?
Yeah, and there's a very important case study that we have, which is San Francisco. San Francisco started instant runoff voting, or ranked choice voting is what they call it there, 2 election cycles ago. So they've done it now 2 times. And they've seen a number of improvements. One is what you just mentioned, that is, campaigns now are much more positive and they tend to be issue-oriented, because the logic now is not to destroy your opponent to get the 1 vote. But it's also important for you now to be ranked highly on somebody else's ballot. So if we are running against each other, but we are ideologically similar, I might say, I would like your vote first, but make sure you vote for Glen second. And you might say the same thing to me. So I'm not going to try and kill you. We're not, it's not a winner take all. So we can, in that sense, almost work together and form coalitions, essentially, of like-minded people instead of trying to kill and smear everybody and get into personal politics. It has to be about the issues, because you're trying to get, you want to be highly ranked, and maybe not first, but second or third. So that's one thing they found in San Francisco. And another thing in San Francisco I think that's very important to point out is that most voters, almost 90% of voters, the first time through said they understood it well. So the issue of complexity, once you start doing it, it really is not that hard. I mean, it's really a matter of, can you pick your first, second, and third choice? And most voters can do this without any sort of problem.
Yeah, that should be intuitive. During the campaign, you go, well, I like this candidate really well. This candidate is sort of okay. This one I don't like. And so people already intuitively know who they like in order of preference. And all you do is just mark your preferences on the ballot.
Yeah. And the issue also, of turnout, what they had is a big increase in turnout as well in San Francisco.
I read a report that somebody did that in some cases, in some areas that traditionally had low turnouts, they had like double or triple the turnout So it worked really well.
Yeah, you're not wasting your vote. There's a reason to vote
Yeah.
because if it's not your first, it might
Yeah.
be your second person who gets elected. And I should just finally say about San Francisco that voters prefer it by a margin of about 5-1 compared to the old system. So I think once Americans start using this new voting system, it's really going to catch on, and we're not going to hopefully go back to plurality. We're going to stay with ranked choice voting once we make the switch.
I want to say that it's been used a lot in elementary schools. Which poster do you like best? Put down your first, second, and third, and they don't have any problems with it.
Well, and it's been used in other countries too. In so many areas, the United States lags behind other countries. Australia's House of Representatives, Ireland's presidential elections,
Mayor of London.
Yeah, various places around the world have used it, and there are bills pending in 15 different states within the U.S. to try to use it in one way or another. Some place, you told me, I guess, Cambridge, Massachusetts?
Cambridge, Massachusetts has used ranked choice voting. They actually use proportional representation, which we may come back to. But it's essentially the same ballot. It's a ranked ballot. And so voters in Cambridge, Mass. have been using that for, I think, probably 7 decades. I should also point out that in March of this year, another city started to use it. Burlington, Vermont just started using ranked choice voting, instant runoff voting for their mayor.
Yeah.
And there are a number of cities that are waiting in the wings that have passed initiatives. Oakland has, and Ferndale, Michigan,
Yeah. They had
Hopkins, Minnesota.
Burlington had a 5-way race for mayor, and they were able to come up with one person who, by that process that we've described, ended up with a majority, and they did it all with one ballot.
That's right.
You
In
know,
the first
because
round,
they
he only
ranked
had
it.
39% of the
And,
vote.
Yeah, he
Saved them a lot of money.
saved them a lot of money. They didn't need to hold another election, and they didn't need to make Vermont voters go out a second time in the snow. You
That's
know?
right.
So
And they ended up with a majority winner.
by compiling the votes that had additionally gone to lower ranked candidates.
So it's really more, it really demonstrates more the actual consensus of the body of voters. Because when you ask someone to rank, you're asking them what's your first you like the most, your second you like the most. And as people go through this process, what we're finding is it's like, well, what can we agree on? You know, and so we get to a point where, you know, once somebody is actually picked, once they get into office, there's not as much of this backstabbing.
Right.
How are people supposed to get the work you elected them to do if you're constantly yelling at them because you're still mad because they won? I mean,
Yeah,
you know.
and this way it's been a majority that was put together
Yeah.
to get them in, and you don't have a person like we have sometimes who got elected with less than half the votes. You mentioned proportional representation a moment ago. I wonder if you could just mention, describe a bit of what that is, because it's a logical extension
That's right.
of what we're talking about.
Yeah,
Lay it out for
if we
us.
had ranked choice ballots where you could pick first, second, and third, the difference in going from instant runoff voting to proportional representation is simply changing the number of people in that district. So proportional representation is when you have multi-member districts. Like I said earlier, we only have single-member districts typically in the U.S.
So the examples for comparison would be like, we've talked about using it in a presidential race or a race for mayor.
That's where instant runoff voting would work.
But if you have multiple members in the same district, like a city council where people are elected at large,
That's right.
or a state legislature where you have several people coming from the same legislative district, then proportional representation would work how? What does that entail?
Well, what it does is it tries to align the number of seats, the distribution of seats in the legislature with the preference in the public. So, for instance, if 15% of the population would consider themselves environmentalists, that would be their number one issue, then you should have approximately 15% of people in the legislature considering the environment to be their number one issue. If you're 20% are anti-war or pacifist in the public, they should have 20% representation. It's a way of assigning representation to minority groups, and I don't just mean on race, but it could be race, it could be on any
Property
sort of
rights?
character, whatever. Libertarian, if there are 10% of the population are libertarians, they should have 10% of the seats in the legislature.
So they would run on a party basis. You could have.
Well, you can run as an individual. You can run, there are actually several different types of proportional representation. Some are based upon parties, some are just based upon individuals, and you just rank the individuals, and you could go across parties however you see fit.
So you could do it on constituencies. You could have, say, a labor or working people.
Absolutely.
You actually
ticket.
use proportional representation to pick the Iraqi government when they
Yeah,
had
yeah,
their
yes,
election.
that's
yeah.
right. In fact, most
Unfortunately, you
democracies,
didn't know who they were. There's no names on the ballot,
Yes.
but you just
but
picked
most
the party, you know.
democracies throughout the world use proportional representation for their legislative bodies. In fact,
Right.
we are far behind in
Yeah.
that we use neither instant runoff voting nor proportional representation. We are essentially using a voting technology, a social technology that's 200 years old, and there have been great improvements in our thinking about this.
Let's talk about how this would affect small parties. We've talked about that some, but I want to talk about that further, and then we also want to talk about how it affects the two big parties. I can see how instant runoff voting benefits overall democracy by lifting up issues and emerging constituencies and so forth. How would small parties, in addition to whatever we've said about small parties, how would this help small parties?
Well, once you eliminate the wasted vote syndrome, third parties then become viable. Again, most democracies on the planet are not two-party systems, they're multi-party systems because they actually don't have the wasted vote syndrome. And so as soon as people can vote for somebody that's closest to them ideologically, they will vote for the person they really want. I was just talking politics this last weekend with somebody, and she's, I was saying, well, there are certain candidates I wish more issues were being raised, and she told me that she long ago gave up trying to vote for somebody. She just votes against somebody. And I think a lot of Americans are in that boat. They simply say, there's somebody that I hate, I'm going to vote for the other party to keep that person out. We need to end that sort of dynamic in our system.
And that's the kind of thing that happens with a two-party system because it's either this or that.
That's right.
Well, we have a relevant example that's happening right now. This March, basically, a Green Party candidate just announced, I saw it on King 5 TV, I don't know, recently, and basically already they're using the word spoiler in the same sentence as this person who has decided to put himself through the rigors of running for a public office. I mean, it's someone is willing to put themselves on the line and represent a political ideology, and then the media is not friendly to them because they're expressing their stress about, well, we know what's going to happen. We're going to end up with, so and so because you're going to pull votes away, and that's not the kind of dynamic we should be having to deal with when we go to picking who we want to be our leaders.
And unfortunately, there is some truth to that, though. I mean, we do have a system that creates a spoiler problem.
That's right.
But the problem, I think, is not, should not blame it on Nader or the third parties or the libertarians. The solution is a structural solution. By fixing our system, you can have the Naders and the libertarians, and they can run and they can contribute ideas. They may or may not win, but they don't force the lesser of two evils, essentially, to win. So it's a structural solution. We should not be ganging up on third parties and trying to drive them off of the stage, which already has too limited of a discourse.
Just having that structure that ensures that they get very few votes makes them look much more marginal than they actually are. A system that would let them get as many as 5% would make them look viable and would mean that they would get more the next time if they were still around.
When we were preparing for the program, Taryn, you mentioned to be on the phone, you're concerned that even the state law that categorizes major parties and minor parties seems unfair. Tell us what your concern is.
Well, the concern is that you have a double standard. Major parties, basically, you're allowed to just file, and you don't have to jump through all these hoops. I don't know, what are the requirements for I don't know them all off the top of my head. For a minor party, you have to get so many signatures, and you have to have this convention with so many people there. And then even if you do gain a major party status, like the Libertarians did, when they had their next election, they had to have 1% in the primary, in order to proceed to the general. To me, that seems restrictive, and it's this gaming thing. The game is built into the structure, and we need to take the game out of the structure and make it a fair, reasonable playing field for people to come and participate.
How would instant runoff voting affect the major parties? We've talked about how it helps diverse views and minor parties and new issues.
Well,
how about the major parties?
For me, I'm sure everyone probably wants to share about this. For me, I think the thing is that right now what we have is we have Democrats and Republicans, and the Democrats tried this experiment where they thought they would take on some of the tax that the Republicans were, they would borrow some planks out of their platform, and they would become more appealing to the full body politic and try to steal some of their votes. Well, it ended up tainting who they were, who they are. And but we have the Democrats and Republicans, and you have this polarization going on. And when you have some people in power over here and some people power over here, the Senate or the House, and things swing wildly back and forth between each election cycle. Somebody goes and gets something done, and then somebody comes in and they tear down everything they just did. And, you know, and the people are just, we have basic needs. You know, there are basic platform planks, I think, across all parties that we could probably all get together on if we could just have a few folks in there who had transcended above politics. And we're actually going there to do the work of the people. And if we get a few of those people in there to remind people that it's not about, you know, rigidly, you know, adhering to this, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. It's really about your planks and your platform. And that's why I personally don't believe we should move to a nonpartisan system. I think that we need to have party labels. I look at it as, you know, labeling truth and honesty. If I go to the supermarket and I'm walking down the aisle, say that's the body politic, and the politicians are on the aisle, I want to know what's in that package. I want to know what they stand for before I cast my vote. So I think if we could get some minor party folks in there to, you know, get the mix going, actually get a real dialogue going, we could settle this swing. And we could start to move forward on make it so. I mean, we live in a diverse culture. We're not always going to agree on everything, nor should we probably. I think there's something to be said for us, you know, like I said earlier, you know, maybe, you know, like the property rights folks, we may not agree with them on everything, but we may agree on some things.
Yeah, you know? I would agree. The populace is made up of diverse opinions, but they don't shift back and forth from election to election. If they can all be represented, it's going to be stable. We're going to have a stable political system.
You know, my experience with Democrats and Republicans is I find a split. That is, I find some Democrats who would not support instant runoff voting because they would not want to work with Greens, they would want to try and destroy Greens. And I found the same thing with Republicans. They don't want to form any sort of coalition or admit to any sort of ideological similarity. They want to destroy them, and it becomes more of a kind of this fighting over this certain amount of territory. But I've also found people in both parties who I think believe that we don't need to be a two-party system. America was not intended. It was, you know, the framers did not intend to make this a two-party
Political parties
system.
aren't even mentioned in the Constitution.
That's very true.
That's just a construct that happened, and it's not in the Constitution. There's no requirement that we have parties, certainly no requirement that we have only two main parties.
Right. So, but there's a split. I mean, there are some people, I think, in both parties, and I think it tends to be those people who are more embedded in the organization bureaucratically. That is, they have something to gain by maintaining this duopoly, their own personal interest. They tend to resist this because they don't want to see the breaking down of the two-party system. They want it to be D's and R's, and they want to be able to, every 10 years, gerrymander the country such that there are D districts and R districts, and that's essentially it. But we need to appeal to those in the major parties who believe that there should be, that there is room for more, that the discourse should be expanded.
Well, I want to talk a bit more about the primary. We've talked about this some, and we're running a little bit tight on time, but the primaries are worth exploring further because they've been so controversial. I want to dig deeper into the problems and solutions about this. Did we talk? You mentioned the Montana, the partisan one, where people have to pick a party label and go with just that ballot in the primary. You mentioned the Louisiana one, where you pick the top two regardless of party. I wonder if we could summarize those two and show how instant runoff voting is better than either of those. Can we do that again?
Yeah, the Montana. I'll talk about the Montana first because that's what we currently have pending the litigation. But the Montana system is you have a primary where you have to take a ballot. You don't have to register in the state as a particular party, but you have to take a ballot, and you can only vote on that ballot line, which would be Democrats or Republicans or Libertarians. And what this does is it limits choice, essentially, for you at the primary. And instant runoff voting would get around this. The way instant runoff voting would work is you could essentially eliminate the primary because you can roll the function of a primary into one election. And so what you have, all qualified candidates go to one election, and now there's one voting day. And when I go to
that's
vote,
like the general election.
it would be a
November.
general election, exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
And I can pick a Republican first in one race, and a Democrat first in another, and I could rank in any order I want, first, second, third.
I would like to put in something here because I have heard from, in fact, my legislator that he wouldn't want instant runoff voting because he wants a partisan primary that would allow him to nominate someone from his party, be his candidate.
Yeah.
Now, it's true, instant runoff voting would kind of skirt around that whole process,
Well, I could speak to
kind
that.
of make it unnecessary. All right?
Here's the deal with political parties. They're actually corporations. And they have, I don't know, do you have a membership card? I didn't get a membership card.
No.
So who's to say who's really, benefiting from this corporation? The fact of the matter is they're using our dime to pick their people, nominate their people for the general election. Now, one could
They're using taxpayers'
That's
money
right.
to run their internal
That's
decision
right.
making.
And their corporation is
Yeah.
being funded
By
to
the-
pick the people.
Yeah.
And so I would assert that it's not a problem to get rid of the primary because their corporation of Democrats or Republicans or Greens or Libertarians
Yeah.
or Socialists,
Yeah.
whoever,
Yeah.
they can all have a nominating convention and pick their people. Now here's where it gets sticky. Now, what if so we have the nominating convention and we pick the official Democrat. That's who we're going to put on the ballot, okay? That's the one we all like. That's the one that came from the card-carrying members who showed up at the convention and everyone told them to go. Okay, so you got your official Democrat, and then you have what you would call unofficial Democrats. This could be the way you do it. You have them file just like they always file, but they get the special. We know what they're representing on that shelf down the aisle in the shopping mall there. They're actually the unofficial Democrat, but maybe there's 4 or 5 unofficial Democrats because they didn't like
Right.
the official Democrat that got picked by the party bosses. So they're going to run. They're going to run for that seat and try to get that nomination.
And that's
so
what the campaign is
and
for.
that's right.
That's the
and Hey,
campaign.
there you go. And so instant runoff voting can handle more than 3 candidates easily. I mean,
And it can handle the official one that comes out of a party convention, as well as the unofficial ones that just nominate themselves.
That's right.
Absolutely. You
That's
have
right.
someone like Dennis Kucinich. He can just go on the ballot as a Democrat, not
That's
the
right.
nominee, but a Democrat.
That's right.
Anyone who votes for him can put down a second choice for Kerry or whoever.
Yeah.
And he hasn't spoiled anything, and people have a choice.
That's
I
right.
should also point out, though, that if the people decide that they actually do love the Montana, which of course they haven't said that, but if people decide they like the Montana primary, instant runoff voting doesn't require you to get rid of this primary. You could, in fact, do IRV at the partisan level of the primary, and then you would rank your Democrats. From the Democrat side, you'd rank your Republicans, you'd rank your Libertarians, and then the winner from those would then go to the general
interesting.
election with IRV.
Okay.
So IRV actually doesn't require you to eliminate
That's true.
the primary.
And this is an internal debate that's
This is
going
the debate.
on.
And
This is
also-
why we're kind of stuck
yeah.
in the mud, pushing the reform forward, and you
Because
don't
some
get the
people want the
messages from the
primary,
organization. We're still trying to decide.
And
what's-
some people
yeah.
would say you would save $13 million a year
Yeah.
by eliminating it,
We
and why
haven't
are we
decided yet.
subsidizing
Yeah.
parties? So I'm not sure. It really depends on what the people want, but you don't
Exactly.
necessarily have to link these two. There's
Okay.
still some flexibility.
But the important thing is that the concept of instant runoff voting or ranked choice
yes.
voting, preference voting, it's a good model to work from, and it really would enliven the campaigns.
Even within the parties
even
themselves.
within, that's
Yeah.
an interesting angle.
Because on the Democrat side, you could have 2 progressive in a 3-person race. There could be 2 progressives and 1 conservative Democrat. The progressives could split their vote, and it's the conservative Democrat that might win, even though it really
Yeah.
is only preferred by a minority of Democrats.
Yeah.
I'm sure
Well-
people have seen examples of that in local races already, the stacking of ballots.
Yeah.
It's called vote splitting, actually. There's actually a term for it. It's a
Okay.
strategy of gaming.
Let me see. I want to make sure that we hit the main points. We've covered a lot of these things that are great. This is something that was on the website from the local
IRV
WA. It's www.irvwa.org.
Yeah.
And if you could summarize what this is looking at the voting systems for Washington State, and we are running tight on time.
Okay.
So if you could be
These are the
Yeah,
primaries.
yeah. This is to
concise.
continue our comparison,
This
and
is-
we didn't get a chance really to talk about IRV versus the Louisiana top two.
So if you could find a couple points in here to make, and then we can move on.
Sure.
But there's good stuff here.
What the Grange doesn't eliminate, which I think is still a major flaw of our system.
The Grange
is,
was the Louisiana
excuse me,
top
the Grange.
two.
I'm so- yeah,
Yeah.
the top two
Yeah.
Louisiana primary.
872.
Yeah.
872 is that you are still really wasting your votes. It's not going to expand the discourse because a vote for a third party is generally going to be a wasted vote
Because this
you
is
want to
only
get
two.
your D or your R
Yeah.
to the general election where they can win. So you're not going to see an expanded discourse. The label that Taryn talked about of there's a spoiler entering the race or you're going to waste your vote, that's still going to be with us. And so we do nothing about improving our democracy and making it a multi-party democracy if we go with the top two. It's going to be a D and an R, or it's going to be two Dems or two Republicans, and that's really going to be it. And when you have two Dems or two Republicans, the choices are going to be even less than they are now. So it's not going to expand the choices that we have. It's going to make it worse. So really, instant runoff voting gives more choice to the voters. You can go across party lines however you want. You can rank however you want. If you eliminate the primary, you can save taxpayer money if you want to. If not, you can use IRV within the primaries and eliminate any spoilers there. So this is just really a more modern voting system. And the people who tend to oppose it are those, I think, who have some pretty deeply entrenched interest in maintaining a two-party system.
This is actually called the comparison chart. You can click on it from the front
It's an
page there.
interesting, it's an interesting thing to read at the website and spend some time with, and you realize that this was for your Initiative 318 that we'll talk about in a moment. That was
This is in
it's
the
over
past.
with, so it's okay to talk
2
about it
years
now.
ago, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but it was
Can
2004.
I just say one
interesting.
thing about the mentality of this? Why people vote? They don't vote for who they want to. If people actually, it's like a dog in a yard on a leash.
Is this another one of
This
Taryn's
is one of
famous
the- 'cause
analogies?
I actually think about these things. I'm washing the dishes or whatever.
I could-
I come up with these things,
Yeah.
If you have the dog on the leash in the yard for hundreds of years, and then one day, dog years even, you take the leash off and you tell them they can go out of the yard.
Yeah.
Will they go out of the yard? Most likely, they need some encouragement. And so that's when it comes to voting, if people were willing to actually vote for a third party and really vote for a third party, I think that we're getting to a point in our population that a third party, even without instant runoff voting, or a minor party, there is a base there. But I think with instant runoff voting, you will see that reflected. People, even once it gets instituted, people will have to make the choice to leave the yard and do what they want to do.
I want to address things. I want to address your analogies are always interesting. I just hear them about every issue that comes up. There's another Taryn analogy.
Maybe I should start keeping a little notebook or something.
Gee, publish a book. There's some criticism that we've heard of instant runoff voting, and we've debunked some of those. I want to just run through a couple more here. Some people have said that it's too complicated for people with limited English speaking ability. And the example you mentioned from San Francisco, those neighborhoods of San Francisco were heavily minority and heavily immigrant and limited English speaking, and they had a great turnout, and people understood it.
That's right.
So that debunks that myth right there.
It absolutely does. I mean, the polling data debunks it. And of course, I think what you would have to do, which San Francisco did a very good job of, is a voter education campaign. And you would explain it in whatever languages you need to. But once you can explain it in somebody's language, people don't understand. I mean, people don't have a hard time understanding who's your first, second, and third choice.
Right.
It's
And
not hard.
the notion that people are voting twice
Yeah, that in fact the courts have looked at that, and there was a case of Stevenson versus Ann Arbor in 1975, and this because Ann Arbor actually had instant runoff voting, and that argument was thrown out. I mean, using an instant runoff does not bring up any new issues other than a traditional runoff, because again, you're also in a sense voting again. You've thrown out the lowest candidates and you're voting again. You're not voting again. You're counting everybody's highest preference at every round, whether it's an instant runoff round or whether it's an election 2 months later.
So everybody's vote is counted again.
Everybody has
because if the person I voted for as my first choice is still in the running, you're counting my vote again too. So
if you vote for a Democrat and then
So
the green gets eliminated, you're voting again for a Democrat.
Yeah.
So I think what some people would know this as one person, one vote, and basically that is kind of a mentality of one person should be allowed to go and vote. It's not one person, one vote. I mean, you know, you could say, okay, 3 over 3 equals 1.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Well, you're also voting in the primary, and then you're voting again in the general, and so, you know,
so that's a debunk. And
it's, constitutionally it's fine. And
yeah.
in fact, it is being used, as we know already.
And another interesting thing is that nothing, like, people want to eliminate the electoral college in the presidential race, and that requires a constitutional amendment. This does not require a constitutional amendment. You can fix this at the state or local level.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, and
So
and many
that's
actually
easy.
many cities throughout the country can just do this by changing their charter, perhaps by initiative, perhaps even by resolution. We are in a little bit of a more difficult situation here in Washington State, in that it seems that cities need to get some sort of authority from the state to do this, and in fact, Vancouver, Washington, just down I-5 a bit, actually passed a city resolution to use instant runoff voting. That was back in '99. They had to wait until 2005, the last state legislative session, for Washington State to give them authority to do it. So, but hopefully Vancouver will be using it shortly, and we're also hoping that the state legislature will simply grant authority to cities that want to use IRV.
Can we mention the campaign that you chaired in 2004?
Well, actually, Rich is also a board member for IRV.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah, that's why we're so chummy. We've been working together for a few years now.
Well, in 2004, Initiative 318 was an initiative to the legislature which required you to get almost 200,000 signatures, which you didn't quite
No,
get.
we fell pretty short of that.
But it would have gone to the legislature, and they would have had to either deal with this, or else, if they didn't deal with it, it would have gone to the voters in the...
They actually had 3 options. They deal with it, which
Yeah.
means they would read it and they like it, and everyone would be
or
so
do an
excited. They
alternative.
would just stamp it and send it over.
Yeah, or do an alternative.
Or they would write their own, amend it a little bit.
Yeah.
And in which case, if they did, we would have the option of putting both our language and their language to a vote of the people. Or they could just reject it and not do anything, or maybe not reject it's not the right word. They would just ignore it, and it would go on automatically to the ballot.
And that would have been, that was in the 2004. And what would Initiative 318 have done?
Well, basically, it would have given us instant runoff voting at the statewide level, and it could have been used throughout all jurisdictions, at local, county.
It would have instituted it for the state level, and then it would have given the option for localities to also adopt instant runoff voting.
And I read the list of from your website of organizations supporting it. It's very diverse. We're short on time, so I won't read the whole
People
list.
can go there. It's all still there.
It's a very impressive list of diverse.
There's a lot of folks were excited about that campaign.
Yeah, and even though we didn't get our 200,000 signatures because we did not have paid signature gatherers,
you don't have
just
big
had
money
some,
behind you.
Yeah, but we felt that it was very successful in raising awareness and educating a large number of people. We feel that the name recognition for instant runoff voting in 2006 is a lot higher than it was when we started I-318.
We've got just a couple of minutes left. I want you to mention Pierce County just briefly.
Yes, if any of your viewers happen to be in Pierce County getting this station, Pierce County
they
right
won't
now.
be, but they'll have to get a
Maybe
copy
they're at
of
a
the
friend's
videotape.
house. Yes. We are going through our decennial charter review. I don't know if Thurston actually has a charter. I don't believe
No,
you're
we
a home
don't.
rule.
No.
Yeah.
We've tried it 3 times.
Okay. It would be a good idea actually
Next
to do
time,
it.
I don't know.
Okay.
We'll see.
But we have we have 21 citizens that were elected, and they review the charter. And I am in discussion with them and lobbying them, you might say, and hoping that they would put an instant runoff voting initiative or a suggested charter change to the people in November. So there's a group of us who are organized, and we are providing information to our elected commissioners. And one thing, a real advantage that we have, I feel, in Pierce County is that we are using the same system that they're using in San Francisco in terms of technology.
The same voting
equipment. Same paper ballots and everything. So,
Yeah.
so what we could actually do is just follow a system that has already been established for 2 election cycles that the people really like by a large margin.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that in Pierce County, it will at least go before the people. And if anybody here in Thurston wants to come up and help out the effort in any way you can, or call people who live in Pierce County and tell them to get involved, we could always use, the more that our commissioners know that the citizens of Pierce County are interested, the more likely they will just move it to the November ballot.
I want to mention the organizations, the websites that have substantial information and it'll get people connected. The Center for Voting and Democracy is a national organization, and Rob Ritchie, who works with that, used to be an Olympia person, so I knew him when he was here. That's at www.fairvote.org. And then the organization that you're involved with, the Initiative 318, is at www.irvwa.org. And then there's a national clearinghouse for instant runoff voting at www.instantrunoff.com. So three good sources to get people running, and then plus talk with folks who are actually working on it.
I would just say about our organization here, IRVWA, we have been a little bit, we're in a holding pattern at this point. But we did build a very strong foundation of the organization, and the website is still the webmaster does a lot of good work, keeps it up to date.
Okay.
There's some radio interviews, people could go and check
Yeah.
it out. I encourage you.
Good. I'd like to invite each of the 3 guests to have a closing thought, and then we'll wrap this thing up.
I would say IRV is great for third parties, but even more so, it's great for anyone who wants to open up the dialogue to new ideas. No one can shut a third party or an independent out by saying he's going to be a spoiler anymore.
Great, thanks.
Well, I would just say a message to Secretary of States everywhere in our state, Sam Reed, to please, at least learn about this. And next time we come to you wanting some change, at least take us a little more seriously and be willing to hear what we have to say, because this is reform, and this is what reform really looks like. To me, moving the primary back, that's not reform.
Okay, quickly.
Yeah, I think that as Americans, we should have some pride that we have a very old democracy. The downside to that, of course, is that we haven't really upgraded our democracy. So I think what we need to do is ranked choice voting as a way of simply modernizing our very old and stable democracy.
Great. Thanks to all 3 of
Thank
you.
you, Glenn.
Thanks for the folks who've been watching. We all want a good democracy. We want a more robust democracy. We want to save taxpayers' dollars. There are a lot of ways of doing it. It's not too complex. It's as easy as 1, 2, 3. So I want to thank Janet and Taryn and Rich. I want to thank all the folks for watching. For information about a variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolence, you can contact the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation at area code 360-491-9093. We're all one human family. We all share this one planet. We can create a better world, but we all have to work at it. And the world needs what you have to offer. Thanks again.